Drone operators of the Madyar division of the Ukrainian armed forces have prevented the attack of the occupying Russian army with tanks and infantry fighting vehicles equipped with anti-drone devices. After the strike by the kamikaze drone, several of the infantrymen in the damaged infantry fighting vehicle were killed, while the survivors fled from the area. Later, the drones targeted the tank and launched a series of strikes. As a result, both vehicles exploded and were disabled, and a large part of the servicemen in the vehicles were killed. As can be seen from the footage taken from the drone, armored fighting vehicles destroyed during previous attacks by the occupying Russian army also remain in the area.
After the incredibly successful Ukrainian Operation Web, Russia flew the surviving aircraft as far away from Ukraine as possible. One of the strategic missile carriers was driven all the way to Chukotka, the maximum distance from Ukraine, writes military analytical portal Defense Express. Analysts have drawn attention to recent satellite images of the military airbase and at the same time the civilian airport Madyar in Chukotka. A publicly available image from the ESA Sentinel satellite on June the 4th shows that a fairly large aircraft has appeared on the military part of the airfield. Although the resolution of the image leaves much to be desired, the object was still identified as a Tu-160 strategic missile carrier. It was identified by its 55.7-meter wingspan and the characteristic shape of its fuselage. As analysts note, in recent months, the Russians have not used this airbase to park strategic missile carriers. Even on June the 2nd, the day after Operation Spiderweb, there were no Tu-60s there. Defense Express links the appearance of the aircraft at this airbase directly to Ukrainian strikes on Russian strategic aviation airfields. The Madyar airbase is located 6,600 kilometers from Ukraine and only 500 from the United States, but getting there will only become possible somewhere closer to the 1930s, the experts write. They note that at this airbase, the aircraft is protected from sabotage not so much by the maximum distance from Ukraine, but by the lack of roads that would connect the city of Madyar with the rest of the Russian territory. This means that a truck with Ukrainian drones simply won't get there. This city is completely dependent on sea and air support. The practical use of even strategic aviation aircraft from such a remote airbase for strikes on Ukraine is more than questionable. Moreover, the very use of the Tu-160 for long-range strikes on Ukraine is not just episodic, but a rare occurrence, the analysts write. Defense Express also saw a certain irony in the fact that it is now safer for a Russian aircraft to be 500 kilometers from the United States than 1,700 kilometers from Ukraine. As reported, Russia has 50,000 troops threatening to besiege Sumy, a city with a pre-war population of 250,000, just 30 kilometers from the border. The Ukrainian Air Force is sortying its small fleet of ex-European F-16s to drop American-made glide bombs on Russian regiments rolling into Sumy Oblast. Euromaidan Press reports. 2 months after an elite Russian drone group cut the supply lines feeding the Ukrainian force, clinging to a 600 square kilometer salient around the town of Sudza in western Russia's Kursk Oblast, ultimately driving the Ukrainians from Kursk after a bitter 6-month battle. The Russians are pressing their advantage on the northern front of their 39-month wider war on Ukraine. In all, there are no fewer than 50,000 Russian troops in Kursk. The Ukrainian brigades holding the line in Sumy, just across the border with Kursk, have many fewer troops, especially now that at least one formation, the elite 82nd Air Assault Brigade, has rushed south to Donetsk Oblast to block a Russian attack on the town of Kostiantynivka, a critical strongpoint in Ukrainian defenses in the east, Euromaidan Press says. The arrival of the 82nd Air Assault Brigade and other reinforcements in the east has helped to slow the Russian advance along the stretch of front line between Pokrovsk and Chasiv Yar, could save Kramatorsk and other key cities comprising the so-called fortress belt threading through Donetsk toward the border in the north. But it's already come at a cost of some border villages in Sumy. And if the Ukrainians aren't careful, they could lose the villages of Yunakivka and Vodolahi. Worse, the city of Sumy itself, 30 kilometers from the border, could come under siege. Euromaidan Press reports. On the Sumy direction, the enemy offensive is intensifying. The Ukrainian Center for Defense Strategies warned. The Kursk group of forces is concentrating reserves in the border zone, attempting to break through between Yunakivka and Vodolahi. Ukrainian ground forces are stretched thin, defending against separate Russian offensives in the north and east, so Ukrainian air power is filling the gaps. The Ukrainian Air Force has received just a few dozen of the 85 American-built F-16 fighters that a Danish-Dutch-Norwegian consortium has pledged from European surplus stocks. 3 of the single-engine supersonic fighters have been lost since they first flew into action in August. The F-16s are precious assets, but the dire situation in Sumy warrants risking them. The pro-Ukrainian conflict intelligence team noted F-16s lobbing US-supplied small-diameter bombs, 114-kilogram precision glide bombs at Russian forces in and around Kursk. The application of F-16s in this role came as somewhat of a surprise. Ukrainian Center for Defense Strategies observed, as they were initially utilized as flying air defense deep within Ukrainian territory and only began appearing near the front line in the Sumy region in late winter 2025, accompanying MiG-29 fighter aircraft that launched guided aerial bombs. It is possible that the Ukrainian Air Force has begun using their F-16s closer to the front line due to the recent arrival of new aircraft or due to an acute need to increase firepower. Ukrainian Center for Defense Strategies proposed.